Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our fourth, in fact, and sadly final of these 4 AdOps webinars. These sessions have replicated the physical session we'd normally run every 6 months, focused on all things ops, and this is our 4th, and we've had a fantastic series focusing on a lot of the key areas that we'd normally cover off in and around all things ops, programmatic. We've looked at open measurement, cross media measurement, programmatic header bidding. We've looked at ad fraud, brand safety, programmatic standards with Tech Lab. And as per our events, what we always finish on and what we've enjoyed finishing on at the events and got real fantastic positive feedback on is focusing more on people's career development and how you're going in terms of developing your careers, whether you go sort of sideways into different roles, keep going in ops in different ways. It's not just about skills, and it became increasingly about some of your core personal developments and some of it on the emotional side as well as the skill side. So we wanted to stay consistent and loyal to that topic and continue with that theme as part of this webinar series. So we have a stellar lineup that will be joining us to talk through the topics, particularly around resilience for yourselves as individuals and how to manage it for teams. And everyone here has experienced that as both individuals, particularly in and around the AdOps, TechOps, programmatic side of things with Paulo, Amy, and Justin, who are currently responsible for people who have gone through the industry like many of yourselves. And Claire, who's now an executive coach and working with her own consultancy called ThriveU, is a very experienced sales manager, has done a lot of people management, and will be giving us a bit of an introduction on some key topics to get us going. Now, before we go to that, I just wanted to introduce, present a little bit of info that's come out very recently as a follow-up survey. We presented this information a couple of years ago at an event, I think it was Melbourne, 2 years ago. And we just wanted to update you on some of the key points to take out from this mentally healthy study, which relates to well-being in our industry. You can find this online, there's a lot more to it. And also please look out for the handbook that's come out today called Mentally Healthy Handbook, that's done in conjunction with businesses. And we work closely with the guys at Unlimited who've sent us this information. And they've produced something with the Heart on My Sleeve group today. It's out today. Have a look in Ad News and Umbrella and the usual places. You'll be able to get a look at that book in terms of how some individuals are coping with the pandemic and keeping their mental health going through these interesting times. And that's exactly what some of this information will show you. And it takes, say, if you're looking at anxiety here, for instance, and we need to be cognizant of there being an issue that we have to be aware of and be prepared to do something about as a community and as individuals, about the figures that you can see where you've got the standard national average in terms of anxiety. Look at the figures from 2018 where the average is higher in our industry than it is generally. The 2020 figure you can see is slightly higher in the extreme areas, and there isn't actually too much change with COVID. So they managed to get some survey respondents during the COVID period to compare and contrast, and you can see that in the study itself. But the key takeout is that it skews higher for those working in our industry, and that's something that we need to continue to work on. Same with depression, same kind of trends that we can see there. It's slightly higher in 2020 in some areas, but importantly, in comparison to average, normal cross-section of society, there's higher levels of depression within our industry. And this is something that we do need to work on. And how do we cope with it? And that's something that Claire's going to be talking to you about in terms of working your resilience muscle. Generally, it's bad habits that we can get into sometimes. Routine's important at certain times, but if you get into bad habits and bad routines and start using that as crux, it could become a problem. So sort of boozing, not exercising enough, not sleeping enough, you can get into some bad habits, and it's worth just being aware of that. So you can see the alcohol consumption has gone up. We're boozing more at home, and you know we need to be careful about this and getting into bad habits, particularly in lockdown. So please be aware of that, all of you, in terms of yourselves and if anyone and those that you're responsible for. And I thought I'd grab a couple of quotes that rang particularly true for me. There's a number of quotes that you can find in the study. And there's definitely an aspect here which we've all seen throughout our careers, and there's just instances where you drop everything, do whatever it takes for clients and for commercial reasons, but you've got to strike that balance between the well-being and what's possible and how far you can push people to get things done. Finding that perfect balance of achieving something fantastic over a period of time and delivering is amazing. You can do almost nothing better as a team, but you've got to always be cognizant and aware of how much energy you and your people have to give to something and how you manage that, and striking that balance. Sometimes there is a responsibility for those responsible for people and for businesses to take that into consideration. And at the same time, we have to be aware of ourselves as individuals and how we're managing the expectations of ourselves, just not of the businesses around us, to be able to deliver. And it's something that we see a lot in our quite fluid and flexible and hard-working industry. We know that it can be fun, and we know that it can be hard work, and it's again about striking that balance. So I thought I'd present that information. We will share the links to this info in the leave behinds. Don't worry, and you can quite easily find it online. But before I jump over to the panel, I'm now going to hand over to Claire. I'm going to stop talking, and Claire is going to start talking. So please jump in, Claire.
Thanks, JJ. Hi, everybody. Okay, so resilience is a pretty big topic, and I'm not going to be able to cover the wide breadth of building resilience today, but I can touch on some things. But I really wanted to kick off with acknowledging the fact that we are living in an epidemic of stress. So globally, we're experiencing more toxic stress now than at any other time in history. And if we thought we were stressed before COVID, COVID presents another level altogether. So stress compromises our immune systems. So it's one of the reasons why we get recurring headaches, recurring colds, why we often feel down or exhausted. Stress is often the culprit there. It stunts our cognitive and emotional growth. And what does that mean? Well, it basically means we can't think clearly. We don't respond as well as we normally would when we're in difficult or challenging situations. So we might be snappy with people, and that could include people we work with as well as the people we love. So it does have an impact on our relationships. It impacts the quality of our sleep, and I think that came out as well in the Unlimited survey, that we're not sleeping well. It speeds the aging process and it shortens our lives. So basically stress sucks. Day to day, stress can fill us with quite a lot of tension and anxiety, and it can be difficult to enjoy even the small things that once made us happy. And that's why building in resilience and building in some resilience tools is really important to help us deal with stress. So when we experience long-term chronic stress, our resilience becomes increasingly depleted, and our tolerance levels for even the smallest things are blown out of all proportion. So being stressed actually creates more stress. So personally and professionally, we all face stress and pressure in our lives, but human beings have evolved to be able to cope with an incredible amount of stress. That's how we've survived. But currently we could be feeling additional stress, not only from the demands of our industry and the demands of our work, but obviously working in isolation and all the obvious stress that COVID-19 has brought into our lives. And I think, as JJ mentioned, too often we try to fix this by looking outward or numbing ourselves with distractions. So we spend our time buying things we don't need, or we think if we find another job, things will be different, or if we find another relationship, things might be different. We distract ourselves through social media and TV, or we numb ourselves, as JJ has just said, by drinking every night, because we need it, or we deserve it, which is nice, but ultimately these solutions are temporary and in the long term quite ineffective. We also know that alcohol is a depressant, so while it might feel fun at the time, long-term use and excessive use is going to make us feel worse in the long run. So if we want to get better at managing stress over the long term, we need to cultivate resilience within ourselves rather than looking for solutions outside of ourselves. So developing mental resources like self-determination, which basically means being in control of our own choices and the actions that we choose to take in our lives. Feelings of self-worth, and I know that those feelings of self-worth can be really compromised in our industry. I know a lot of people struggle with that, not being good enough and always striving. That's really exhausting and can have a huge impact, but developing those feelings of self-worth is a really important resilience tool. And it sounds esoteric, but kindness, practicing kindness for ourselves and also for others makes us more resilient. It helps us to cope with adversity and push through when we're facing challenging times. So whilst resilience is often defined as having a capacity to recover from loss or from trauma, it's actually much more than that. True resilience fosters well-being. So well-being and resilience promote each other in an upward spiral. So having that element of well-being that exists within our lives as a constant rather than something that we try to focus on when the going gets tough. So resilience is built over time. It's something we need to exercise like a muscle through daily practice. So understanding our strengths and values, and I'll talk a little bit about them later, and putting them to use. Focusing on cultivating positive emotions like joy, hope, optimism, and gratitude all support resilience. And also having a really supportive community around you. The Unlimited survey talked a lot about the fact that there really isn't a huge amount of trust that exists in organisations at the moment, which is a whole nother topic. So it's really important to have mentors, friends and family and people around you that you trust that you can call on when you need that extra support during tough times. So as you grow these strengths and become more resilient, you'll feel less anxiety and irritation, less frustration and disappointment, less resentment and less hurt by the actions of other people, less buffeted by the things that happen to us. Thanks, JJ.
Thank you very much. Now let me get the screen back. Thank you so much. So that gets us thinking about the way that we need to take a bit of responsibility personally, and that's going to be an important part of anyone's developing of resilience. But if I bring all the panelists in now, we're going to look at things from more of a team perspective and a business perspective, and the impact that we've seen in the industry, but also what some of our esteemed panelists here are seeing currently, how they're managing it personally and also with their teams. So we've got a good cross section here that's very representative. And I'm going to start with you, Amy, because the business that you run, remote working isn't necessarily new to how you guys run your business and all the rest of it. But, we remain in these unprecedented times. How have you at A&A Digital been managing your workloads in this remote working period?
So I think I sort of said earlier, like this is it's a bit of a weird question actually for me to answer, because I've been working remotely for 9 years. So I actually, prior to this, I felt like I had my world pretty in order. I had my kind of, routine, and the team were really the same. So one of the early kind of big differences that I really felt with this was that the no face-to-face catch-ups, coffees, meetings with clients, with the team and with friends as well. I realized how much I relied on that, as a remote worker. I think for validation and still feeling connected and relevant and, all of those things, and suddenly not having that personal contact was really hard to get a grip on. So we've tried to kind of keep doing it over the phone, but there's no doubt that it doesn't have the same, kind of free flow of conversation, that calls tend to be shorter and, much more to the point rather than, the chit chatty bit that usually wraps around it. As a whole team, I would say probably the thing that has been most challenging for us, even for a team that have, are used to remote working, was having husbands and kids home as well. So, it was constant distraction, lots of noise, lots of guilt, lots of trying to figure out how to rejuggle things. And so we have really felt for people who were trying to learn how to work from home with all of that in the mix, because it was really tough for us as well. So what we've kind of done, as a group is, we've increased our regular catch-ups. So, we catch up as a group much more often. We use Slack internally for conversation and for kind of client channels, but we also opened up a few just for a bit of venting, sharing a few funnies, everybody's war stories from the day. There is a lot of kind of trust and history in the team. So we were all pretty candid about, what we were dealing with. And it did help a lot to kind of know that, you weren't alone. From my perspective, trying to cope with this, I think, my stress levels have been pretty high this year, higher than they've been for a long time. So I tried to also just lean in on a lot of other things where I felt like I could sort of learn as well. So, some of the Business Chicks webinars, there was a Verizon series that I found really helpful. Some of the IAB ones, and also just a lot of reading. And I think trying to just realize that, I wasn't the only one feeling all this stress and anxiety. And I think just sort of lack of control over your day to day, and then sort of try to figure out, what was in my control, and just focus on those things and try not to let all the uncertainty come in too much. But I would say it has probably been a bit of a, day at a time type scenario, really.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've done a fair amount of remote working myself too. And what I've now found is weird is everyone else is remote. So those ways that you say in terms of connecting and everything else that you also rely upon, you get set feeling of isolation that can happen. You miss that suddenly whilst you've got into some of the good habits. And we actually found in terms of process at IB Australia, it's really nice to have that morning check-in as a team rather than sort of a weekly one, and just have that a different layer of human communication. And I wonder, Justin, in terms of the processes of running your team and say the communication, it's like we've all got 5 or 6 different video conf tools, and we're Slacking, emailing, SMSing, and WhatsApping or whatever. Have you undergone any changes in terms of how your processes are with you and your teams operationally in how you communicate and function?
Yeah, certainly have. I think that's just been a necessary part of remote working. And I think at the start, it was very much a big shock to the system for everyone having to work from home permanently. I think we've all worked from home at some point and found that, we can work from home. But when you move to a permanent nature, it's a very different situation. Amy touched on the distractions of having other people around, but also you think about a workspace versus potentially a home space where you don't have an office, multiple screens, different parts of your house. I know I've been a nomad in my own house, from kitchen to dining table to couch to bed to get away and get some peace. But for the team, I think what initially we had to do was make sure that communication was really strong and make sure people felt supported, updated, that there was so much to communicate. We wanted to make sure that there was all the information that we could provide and we knew about, that we could provide them. And in the teams that we have, nearly every single team started daily stand-ups. And at the start, that was to disseminate information, talk about what's happening in the business, but also with the lockdown. And as that's evolved, there's less of that sort of communication, and they've turned into a real necessary part of keeping that social aspect of our business. I think everyone recognizes that the people we work with, we spend nearly the most part of our lives with those people when you think about getting home and sleeping. So those relationships are really key, and to continue those daily stand-ups, even if there's nothing to talk about, no updates, they're being really useful. And I think every team is continuing to do those, and implementing those has been really effective. And I think once we go back to whatever the new normal is, going back to part-time in the office or full-time in the office. Those sort of check-ins, we're definitely going to continue to have, even if they're over coffee, like they used to be, but more of a formal, we're having this because it's useful for our team and our culture. So that's been something we've implemented. And I think we had to be careful at the start. A lot of people I've spoken to recognize that meeting volumes went up, many video calls and getting video called out. But that's been, having those as an essential part of our day and week has been really beneficial.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that concept of what you might take into your normal routines once we go back to normality, whatever that means. And how have you found that, Paulo, at Google? Have you got into some healthy operational habits you can see yourself continuing after sort of post-COVID lockdown, whatever that will be?
Yes. Well, I sure hope so. I think there's definitely some things that have happened over the last few months where I just hope that, to your point, once normality, whatever that is, returns, that I can keep doing. And I think some examples of that would be, first and foremost, I think everyone's going to touch on this, is around the deliberate focus on well-being. It is definitely more nuanced these days. We've got to take into account, things like carers leave and just your productivity in your home environment. But just to making that first 10 minutes of every conversation, just to better understand, how you're doing, how you're feeling, and, actively listening and trying to understand the backgrounds of that individual. To me, I hope to continue to do that. On top of that I think it's about, as a manager, acknowledging that I think is, to Claire's point on resilience, is acknowledging that it's normal to feel anxious and stressed and not your usual self. And I think that's just a useful, or something that I hope to continue doing in the future. Other than that, I'm focusing a lot more with my team on workload, prioritization and rebalancing. That involves for us is planning the week and month ahead, but importantly, understanding there are more trade-offs that need to take place these days than before. This also applies to the clients we work with. Obviously, we work more of a consultancy approach, but they also need to pivot and change the direction, often at short notice, and those deadlines seems to fluctuate a little bit more often. So recognizing as an individual and a team that we need to bake in time to pivot, to focus elsewhere, or to stop a project and do something else instead. And I think lastly, as a habit, I think a few people have already mentioned this, is I used to, of course, spend a lot of my days traveling, whether it's Melbourne, Adelaide, etc. Just the need of meeting effectiveness in face-to-face versus online or video. Just that time saving has been a useful addition to my daily time, and hopefully it's just more value-adding pieces of work that I can do as a result of that.
Yeah. I mean, even just getting into some, it took me a while to get into good routines, put some clothes on, take a walk when you're on the phone, making calls. Actually it requires a bit of structure to what is a very unstructured environment to make it manageable. We've actually got a question come in about onboarding. So I wonder, onboarded anyone in the team in this remote period within your team? How's Google managing that in terms of an onboarding of new people in this environment?
It's a really good question. So for context, 2/5 of my team joined in the last 3 months. Right. So again, the benefits of working for a big tech company means that on their first day of working from home, they had their laptop ready to go. They had they were able to log in and access various tools and platforms. So dare I say, that is not your standard, setup. But fortunately, we've got that in place. What I think I've had to do as a manager is probably increase the onboarding time frame. So, of course, like a lot of other businesses, coaching, shadowing, learning are all kind of crucial steps in onboarding. We've just had to bake in a little bit longer time in order to do that. Not impossible. So increasing frequency of face-to-face meetings, having more informal one-on-one times with other people in different teams have all helped with that. But I would caveat that culture and distilling what it means to work at a company when you're working from home is really hard. And I don't think we've solved for that just yet. But of course, we have TGIFs on a Friday still. It's just more virtual rather than in person. And again, more social times. But it is, I would say, much harder these days than it was kind of prior to COVID.
Yeah, it's great. You're aware of that. So Claire, thank you very much. Claire, in terms of mindfulness, something I know you're a big fan of, and helping people to try and help themselves during this period in particular, but, you know, moving forwards in their life, you got any tips in terms of some consistent practice that you have, or something you can recommend to get people going if it's a bit new to them, particularly, you know, now they're at home a lot, and how it can help them?
Yeah, absolutely. I did also just want to touch though on a couple of things that Paulo just talked about then, in that it's really important to acknowledge the challenges we're facing at the moment and not pretend that they're not there. So it's really important to talk about them, but then it's also just as important to talk about the opportunity. And I think that what COVID has given all of us, you know, and I work for myself, but I've had my own challenges through COVID, is an opportunity to think about things differently or do things differently, and open up that new way of thinking to our teams so that everyone feels as though they have a contribution to make in terms of how could we be doing things differently to the way that we did them before? What's more effective? How can we be more creative? So I think, to me, there's an opportunity there. And that's a big part of resilience, right? It's about, you can acknowledge the challenge, but a big part of it is also thinking, okay, with optimism, how can we look at things differently and approach problem solving in a more creative way? So I think that that's really important. Also, just touching on what you were saying then, JJ, around structure and routine. I found when I first, you know, I went from running a team of 50 people to suddenly I'm working for myself in my own office, and it took me a good, you know, 6 months, I would say, to adjust to that and to put in routines and structure that didn't have me wandering to the fridge every 5 minutes, opening it up and seeing if there was something interesting inside, you know, like really trying to get some structure to my day, because all those other structures were gone. And we forget, you know, when we're used to being in an office and having structure to our day and being in face-to-face meetings or getting on a plane to go to a meeting, whatever it might be, and those all fall away, we have to create new structures that actually support us. So that again is an opportunity. I think having some routine, like still getting up at the same time, still having a shower and, you know, getting dressed, putting your pants on, JJ, that's a good way to start the day. But getting some exercise in the day, even if it's just a 20-minute walk, even if it's just getting fresh air and having a change of environment. And also not doing all your calls or all your meetings on video. I'm hoping now that we're sort of 3 months into this COVID period that we're relying less on getting everyone to be face-to-face on video, because that presents another level of exhaustion than it would if we were face-to-face in a meeting room. It's really, really tiring being on screen all the time, because you're constantly thinking, am I paying attention? You know, you're looking at things in people's backgrounds. So it's actually really tiring for us as humans to be on screen all the time. So where can you just pick up the phone to people, mixing it up a bit? So I digress. But anyway, mindfulness. So mindfulness is a really important element of resilience. And it helps us to stay grounded and focused during challenging times. And again, a bit like resilience, you know, mindfulness is thrown around as this thing we're all supposed to be doing, but actually, what is it? I think the first thing to be mindful of, though, is that we have little to no control over what other people say or do, or certain events that happen in our lives. But what we can control is our own mind, and we can control how we respond when things get tough. So that self-talk and that way that we actually approach problem solving for ourselves is a really important foundation of mindfulness. Just having that awareness of the stories we're telling ourselves. But mindfulness is essentially an ability to meet that whatever's happening in our lives with composure and courage, and fundamentally compassion for ourselves and then for others. Because if we can't have compassion for ourselves first, it's going to be really hard to have compassion for other people. So it does start with us. And I don't mean in an ego, I'm better than everyone else way. I mean, I need to take care of myself first before I can effectively take care of my team or my family or the people around me. But mindfulness is essentially the art of paying careful attention to what's happening in our lives and responding to that experience in the moment. It's about making whatever we're doing right now the most important thing. So I would say, you know, I'm sure there are people on the webinar right now, no judgment, but they're checking emails and they're looking at their socials whilst they're also on the webinar, right? And that's a state of distraction. We don't realize how much of our time is spent in distraction. And that is also quite exhausting and erodes resilience. When we're present, we spend less time ruminating about the past, which is where depression sits, and worrying about the future, which is where anxiety sits. So we learn to be more present right now in this moment. So a great simple way to practice mindfulness is to get comfortable with not doing. And by that, I mean not reacting or responding immediately when we're under stress. So we take a pause before we react or respond. So that helps just to create a little bit of space around our emotional responses, because in a lot of circumstances right now, our emotions are heightened. Everything feels a little bit heightened. So if we can get a little bit comfortable with not immediately responding and taking a bit of time, that's a really good foundational practice of mindfulness. Mindful awareness can simply be focusing on our breath. So, you know, and that's a very simple mindfulness meditation technique, is just to focus on the in and out breath. It can be about focusing on our physical sensations. So noticing that if we're feeling anxious, noticing that we've got a tightness in our chest and actually thinking, okay, well, I'm really noticing it. I'm going to lead into that feeling, which allows us to sort of transpose that feeling. But also really noticing our thoughts. You know, we can't get rid of our thoughts. They're always going to be there, but just noticing what thoughts are spiraling through our mind and really challenging ourselves with asking ourselves the question, is that true? So gradually we start to create some space between our reactions and our experience. But mindfulness is essentially about paying attention. It can be cultivated through meditation. And I'm a huge proponent of meditation, particularly in terms of managing stress and building our resilience. But when we're more mindful, we're really more able to regulate our nervous system, so we don't always feel like we're in fight or flight. We learn to discipline our mind, so we're not so restless and distracted all the time. But just focusing on the current moment, it sounds easy and simple, but it's really not. That's essentially the foundation of mindfulness. It's gaining control over our mind and our emotions, which is pretty liberating. But first of all, we have to understand ourselves before we can understand other people. And that's where it's so important when it comes to teams and leadership. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I know we just been talking about you writing a few blog pieces for us every sort of 4, 6 to 8 weeks. So perhaps we can help people get on the path to that and start showing them the benefits, and we'll work on that through blog piece that works in and around our mentorship program that we're coming to the end of the second phase. We kick off the next phase, actually probably the beginning of next year, but you'll be able to apply for that before Christmas. Thank you, Claire. That's important stuff. Now, Amy, wondering about the check-in process and how you're giving and receiving feedback to your people as you are used to this remote way of working, but some of the different ways in which you might be checking in or communicating with your teams at this time.
Yeah, so I mean, as a remote team, which we always have been, I do want to add, I agree really heavily with Claire on the 6 months piece. And every time someone has joined my team, I have always said to them, it will take you 6 months to find your flow and figure out how to feel like you're doing a day's work in a, non-traditional scenario. So I do think the time piece is really important. But for us, I mean, I think the communication and feedback has to be really constant anyway. So we already had that flow. So for us, it's a combo of like phone chats, group meetings, Slack discussions. I've definitely tried to make more time to talk to people about what's happening within the business the last few months, because I think, naturally, people do really worry about like what's going to happen. And, if we have a quieter week or, when campaigns were all being cancelled, it's like, well, what do we do? What's going to happen to our workload, and are our jobs safe? So I've tried to be pretty candid and open with people, but I do think that it's a balance between being honest and just spreading the anxiety further. You know, you don't want to worry people either. So, but I also don't really believe in being false positive. You know, I'm a pretty open book, and people would have realized that. So I think, you know, there's definitely been an adjustment in communication, and I think just kind of going, you know, I think being real about, you know, some days, you know, are good and some days are not. And, you know, we talk and we keep in touch, and we, you know, we share the wins, and we talk, you know, candidly about, you know, the things that have not been amazing. In terms of, you know, keeping people engaged, particularly when workloads were a little bit in flux, we kind of just thought, well, you know, we knew that a lot of people that we work with, you know, particularly publishers, were really struggling. So we kind of just went, well, how can we kind of proactively use this time to, you know, see where we can add value, you know, either, you know, at no charge or very minimal charge to publishers who are also really struggling. And I think having that as a focus really helped keep people busy when workloads were a little bit in flux. So, you know, finding some ways where you felt we could positively add value and see where we could provide some solutions. We've also kind of used some of the time, which I think has helped people overall, just with general confidence levels and still feeling like they were engaged in their roles, to catch up on things like certifications, you know, attending some webinars, doing some reading. We've opened up some internal channels around, you know, things like privacy and, you know, death of the cookie. And, you know, we've had a lot of internal discussions around that. And, you know, people are putting sort of, you know, pretty candid thoughts into some of those. So I think that has been quite productive. And I think it has kept like discussions going in a really positive way, you know, around people's roles.
That sounds very constructive. I mean, and a useful, I mean, there is a question that's come in from Tim Stanford, actually, that in relation to how does this compare to previous sort of crises that we've seen, as it were, whether it's GFC or even going back to 9/11. And for me, it's just sort of, we just don't know when this is going to end. I mean, I'm here in Melbourne, locked down again. So we think it's a period of time and we can prepare for that. Then we're going to go back to what this normality is. But actually, you know, this time round, it feels like it's difficult to predict, isn't it? Which makes it also...
Yeah, like I honestly think that this has been the most challenging period of my entire career.
Right.
And I think it's just that feeling of like complete lack of control or knowledge of actually where this is going to go. So I also think, you know, in terms of feedback and, you know, sharing info, like I was pretty candid with my team when we were talking, you know, I was talking about, you know, what I was going to talk about today, because I said to them, like, to be honest, I really do not feel like I've done a particularly outstanding job. It has been really hard to adjust to this and to go, you know, I've been running this business for 9 years, you know, we had a really good flow, and then it's like, well, what is going to happen? And, you know, it's been pretty humbling, I think, in a lot of ways to realize that, you know, you have to sort of really look at, you know, strengths and weaknesses, both professionally and personally, and, you know, adjust how you operate around some of those, and, you know, figure out how to double down and, you know, create a new business plan, you know, to figure out, you know, how we go forward. The only other thing I would say on feedback though is that, so I had shared my thoughts on that with my guys, and actually one of them came back to me with a list and said, well, you might feel like that, but actually if you look at, you know, this whole period, you have actually, you know, like you've kept the team together, you know, we've, you know, we lost a client or two, but we also re-won some clients. You know, everyone's in their jobs. You haven't killed your husband. You know, your kids are all right. You know, so, and I think actually that was really amazing for me too. So I would say to people, like, make sure you give feedback up the chain as well as receiving it from people who are trying to prop you up. It's, as a leader of the team, it is really tough. So I think like that really helped me, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. That's
a great point. I mean, that's emotional connection, Justin, in terms of how you're working to enable your people to be honest with you and authentic and open about some of their vulnerabilities, but also vice versa. Have you found yourself engaging or connecting with some of your people in a slightly different way, even in this lockdown, beyond just the, you know, getting on the phone and doing a video call?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I wouldn't say it's just with my team, but across the business, anyone I'm speaking to, having really human and honest conversations, and echo Amy's comments about not feeling like I'm doing a great job at this. We're all learning and getting through this situation. So every moment of learning and adapting is something new that I can put into my tool belt. But I think making sure we're having those human and honest conversations is critical. And I'll also echo Amy's comments around giving really probably more detailed business updates and business status to people has been critical. Making people feel like we're aware of the situation, we're in control, that things are looking good, or that we have a plan for when things are looking not so good. Those sort of updates like let our teams have a better sense that the business is in good shape and we're able to continue what we're doing. So I've definitely changed my communication style and the sort of things I talk about with my teams in that way. And one of the really key things that I think I've identified is one-on-ones, and that mentoring of staff is really about building that personal private business relationship with your people. And as a manager and a leader of teams, having that understanding of people is really critical, in my view, to make sure that you can give them the best leadership possible, understanding where they're coming from, what their situation is, what they need, where they can go. And I think I've seen in the short space of time that we've had with working remotely, my understanding of people has grown immensely. Having a view into their lives and what they're willing to share has been so eye-opening. And that stuff would have been learnt in normal working situation. It just would have taken a lot longer. So being able to have a view into people's homes, into their kitchen, into their office, see their kids, their pets, all of those sorts of things get you that personal connection that is really essential in being a great manager and a great leader of people. So those personal connections I've really cherished, and building those relationships with my team has been really valuable, I would say. And I think across the business, we're doing that sort of thing as well. So not just one-on-one with between managers and within teams, but across the business in wider commercial meetings, having people share their journey, how they're feeling, their remote working experiences. So everyone can take some learning from what other people are going through. As I said at the start, this is all new to all of us. So yeah, getting some learnings from what our other people are doing has been beneficial.
Albert, I'm going to put you on the spot here, because I've chatting to you recently. You mentioned that you've been knocking on people's doors, obviously within the parameters of COVID restrictions up there in Sydney. You've been appearing in some of your colleagues' kitchens to check in on them physically.
Yes. So we have.
I love that.
I think that has really been, as well, maybe not now that we're potentially New South Wales is going back a little bit, but as it's relaxed a little bit, I think, and across the business we're seeing this, people are starting to hot desk, but not with clients, with each other, going and spending some time at someone's house for a day. That personal connection that we have in the office isn't there. So going and having lunch at someone's house, I did that recently with some of my team, and it was so enjoyable getting to have a view into their world and have them invite us into their home. It's not something that you would normally get, if ever. I can probably count on one hand the number of times that's happened in my career. So we're seeing more of that, and the deeper connections we'll have out of this across our people, I think will just be a benefit to our business. So my advice for anyone is to really lean into that and build those deeper connections and share yourself as much as you're willing to build that social and friendship aspect of our workplaces. That's
great. And that sort of family feeling, that communal effort, Paulo, how do you monitor your energy levels of your people? I mean, sometimes it's an important thing. And I remember as a manager, just having little different ways of approaching different people, because everyone's different, to get them to be honest about how they're feeling and how they're coping, and get through that veneer, because you just want to be be able to really ascertain where they're at. How do you manage that? How do you gauge that, particularly in this remote environment?
Yeah, it's difficult. I would say it's a lot harder now. It ultimately all comes down to visibility, right? Again, I think a few people have already mentioned this, maintaining kind of regular interactions. Of course, actively listening, understanding how you're doing, how you're feeling, and ensuring a significant amount of time is spent having those discussions up front before kind of getting to business topics. It's always worth, I suppose, highlighting existing support groups and trainings that are available if you feel that they need, additional skill sets and resilience in order to deal with it. We've got plenty in our work environments that are available to every person in the company, but often not easy to surface. So I think pointing them in the right directions there. And I would say lastly, is probably what I try to do at least is kind of leading by example, is, telling people and making it obvious in my calendar, this is time for a break. I've had maybe 3 video calls in a row and I just need to grab a snack or some food. I need to make time to pick up my child in daycare. And just in general, I suppose, prioritizing well-being. At the same time as highlighting failures and saying, what, guys, I'm a little bit fatigued. A lot of people have not taken their annual leave in the last few months because they feel they can't, go to very sunny, hot destinations. But I think we're coming to a point in time where people whether it's at home or with a family member, if they can do so, just taking a break, having a longer weekend, or just taking a week out is probably what I'll suggest. Yeah,
and everyone's quite surprised how sort of tiring and exhausting it can be, particularly if you're doing a lot of them, which I found to be a change. And actually, one benefit of having a 9-year-old boy at home, whilst it can be quite annoying at times, is if you want to completely break from what you're doing, hang out with a 9-year-old and re-experience some of their inanity for about 20 minutes, and you completely forget about what you're on about before.
I'm assuming you're doing a lot of that during these school holidays then.
Yeah. Well, he's back at school now here in Victoria, but he's actually upstairs on video call. Probably not. He's actually playing Fortnite, so to go and check on him in a minute. So Claire, I thought one important area to touch upon as we near the end of this, and I know it's a big topic, but I thought I'd again sort of prompt you to give us a bit of guidance in and around how people find strength and sort of foundational base for themselves in terms of purpose and meaning, and how you go about sort of starting that whilst in isolation for those that are sort of looking for direction in around these rather large topics.
Yeah, it's actually been so lovely hearing from Justin, Paulo and Amy about hearing their own vulnerable stories. And, it's such an important part of leadership to be able to show your own vulnerability, because that allows our team members to feel vulnerable as well and share their vulnerability. And I think one of the things that I think is great, and I've seen this a lot across the board with a lot of clients, is there's been a lot of growth that's come out of quite a shitty situation with COVID. So we're all experiencing this enormous growth. We're all stepping into situations we've never experienced before. So we're really sort of stepping into that learning, but which I think is a wonderful benefit of the situation that we find ourselves in. But understanding our strengths and values and knowing what drives us really helps us make better decisions. And it also helps us get clearer on how we spend our time and, more importantly, I think, our energy. So I'd say the first step for anyone is to find out what your strengths and values are. A lot of the time we don't know. We might think we've got certain strengths based on feedback that we've had from a manager or someone else. But actually sometimes it's not even a strength, it's just a learned behavior or something that we've gotten used to doing, and it actually de-energizes us over time. There are loads of free online tools you can use. I can provide a few after this webinar if that's helpful for people. Or you can do an in-depth strengths profile with someone like me or a coach or someone in your HR department. But essentially strengths are defined as behaving and thinking and feeling in a way that's authentic and energizing and enables you to perform at your best. So it gives you that energy and drive, so we're less likely to be worn out at the end of the day. So once we understand our strengths, we can be more proactive and more in control of the direction our career is taking. So we're less stressed, we're more engaged, we perform better at work, we're more confident, we've got more vitality, we're more resilient, and we're more likely to achieve our goals. Once we also understand our strengths and our values, it helps us make better decisions in terms of next step in our career, or teams that we want to be a part of, or even organizations that we want to work for. You know, we can get a lot clearer on whether our values and the values of the organization are aligned. So it also helps us make better decisions when it comes to next steps in our career. And the other thing is that organizations and leaders that focus on leveraging employee strengths have much lower staff turnover. People are generally more engaged. Clients are more satisfied, you've got increased profitability and performance. So it's a bit of a win-win for everyone. I think the opportunity with working remotely and learning to work in a different way can help us narrow in on what parts of our role we're really good at and enjoy, and which ones we aren't. Then maybe it actually also gives us an opportunity as teams to start looking at different responsibilities that people have across the team and maybe moving and shifting those a bit. So I think it does present that opportunity, because when you're working in this way, you can actually, all the sort of peripheral stuff goes, and you can actually become quite focused on specific tasks, and that can help you work out what you do and don't like. So this allows us to take a bit of more active role in how we manage our careers and be more proactive with our leaders and our managers around what we'd like to be working on. And it helps to stop us buying into the fear that feels, you know, where we feel like things are happening to us rather than us having some control over the direction that our career or our job or our you know, the requirements that we've got for that week. It's not happening to us. We've actually got an active role in what that looks like. You know, so I will say when it comes to our careers, no matter what's going on, we always have a choice. We always have a choice about what role we take, how we interact with our team, how we manage a task. So it's really important to make decisions that aren't based on fear, that they're based on hope and the possibility of, you know, what could be next. So I think strengths and values really important part of resilience, but it's really important for us to know ourselves. When we understand ourselves well, we're better able to understand other people.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll as you've offered, we'll leave some tips behind in the after this event where you can access the bit of the collateral and some information. And we look forward to those ongoing articles to help all of you just give you a bit of direction around in these areas. And it's you know, it's an ongoing, long personal journey. It's not a quick thing, but it's sort of how to get started, really, which is one of the questions that's come through that we can help answer. Well, just when near the end of our time, I thought I would completely shift topic, because one aspect, whilst we know that it's been quite hard times commercially for some businesses, for a lot of businesses at the moment, has been how we've seen some people let go in certain roles. There's been a lot of pressure on operational roles, AdOps teams, trafficking, programmatic teams running even leaner than ever, which seems amazing because we know how lean a lot of those teams are. And I thought I'd ask you, Justin, because one topic that's come up from a few people I've talked to in the industry, and you hear a few times, is, you know, what's going to happen with their roles as soon as people start working remotely? Will businesses go, well, everything can be remote, or more things operationally can be remote? And as a result, what's the most effective option for that in terms of cost? I'll just outsource to other countries where it's a lot cheaper. And I know that you guys at Verizon have done a fair amount of some of it remote, some of it locally in terms of trafficking, how you manage the ops team. So I thought for those out there that are a bit worried about this, what's the balance that you guys strike around, and how do you manage that in terms of your operational teams?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and can't shy away from the fact that a business does need to look at costs and how they can remain profitable, and that can lead to outsourcing of some roles. But we've really seen it as an opportunity for our teams locally. What we found is the process-based, platform-based types of tasks. They're the things that once you've done them, once you've nailed them, continuing to do them doesn't really add anything to your career, once you're an expert at it, which can happen in a short time for a lot of these sort of processes, we look at it as we want to add dot points to people's CVs, and continuing on that journey is going to stop at some point. So we really look at it as transforming what we do locally versus what we outsource. And that has allowed us to really put some deeper experience and skills into our local teams that drive a better business outcome. And if you think about the results that an individual can deliver for a business, the outcomes that an individual's roles and responsibilities deliver, then having someone who's deeper connection with clients or more consultative, those are the sorts of roles that we want to have locally. And ops roles are the perfect entryway into those types of roles, because we have a great understanding of how a business works, how operations works, all the parts of the business that require us to become greater customer service, greater consultancy. So we've really seen it as an opportunity for our teams to evolve with the business as it's needed to, and grow everyone's careers that we bring into the business. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, I used to have this a lot with staff when you're trying to automate certain processes that they used to do. And my point would be, you shouldn't be wanting to do that, really. You want to be evolving more in whether it's analytical, technical, commercial, for your career. Don't try and cling on to the bits that are very administrative and repetitive too much, because it's that you want to be utilizing your skills as a human that are more creative. So I think there's an important balance to be found.
Yeah, we're always looking for the next thing that we could have our teams work on. And that means freeing up time and identifying the things that can potentially be stopped or if they need to be continued, outsourced. And a lot of the time it's training and creating processes, which our teams, being the experts locally, need to create and deliver and manage with our outsourced teams. And that's an important part of the business as well, that's outsourcing, having that control and management of those outsourced processes.
Okay, well, I'm going to stop there. So we're out of time. If there's any other points that anyone on the panel wants to make, but thank you all so much.